Okay, today is Tuesday, February 28th. It's 1 p.m. This is a Prescott City Council study session. Roll call, please.
Mayor Good.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Montoya.
Here.
Councilwoman Kentelme.
Here.
Councilman Moore.
Here.
Councilmember Roosing.
Here.
Councilman Sischka.
Here.
And Councilman Tenney.
Here.
All are present.
Very good. We have one item on the agenda. That's the mid-year budget report from our Director of Finance, Mark Woodfill. Good to see you.
Thank you, sir. As you said, Mark Woodfill, Budget and Finance Director. Today, as we go through the mid-year budget report, I've structured a little different than I have in years past for a couple reasons that we'll get into as we go through it. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
3 to 6 inches away. Part of the reason is we provide you a bi-monthly budget report in the council updates that we put out every other month. So I'm going to focus really more on the coming year and some of the concerns and some of the problems that I see that we're going to have to address, and also some of the big changes. So as we get into this, some of the things to consider as we get into 24 is legislative attacks on city revenues. And I've highlighted that because they are significant this year, as you may know, and we're going to go through some of that and what that would mean if some of these pass. Some of them have already been partially killed because nothing's ever dead until the legislature is out, but we'll talk about that. Another thing is the council's priority has been and should be, in my opinion, the funding of the employee market compensation plan. That the council put in a few years ago, and if we don't fund it, we're going to be studying it again in a few years and having to figure out how to implement it. It's just something to keep funding, keep it in place, try to keep it working to the point that we can attract employees and we don't have to study it and do it. Of course, there's a cost to that. There's a cost to all these things, which is going to be kind of the issue today. Funding of the airport capital to now and into the future. In 23, there's $15 million in the budget for airport capital. 2.6 of that is city funded. That doesn't mention the $30 million contingency we put in there for potential land acquisition. So airport capital is a huge thing the council is going to have to deal with from now on for several years. Not to even mention the $96 million over the next 5 years that is needed out there. The public safety expansion needs, and I have some preliminary slides for 2024 to kind of go over with you to give you just an idea on that for stuff we've been looking at the last few weeks. Parks and open space funding. We have a Gateway Park the council is interested in. Well, we budgeted the planning for that this year, and you're going to see that, I think, on today's agenda.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's $4 million to build. We're going to have to come up with that $4 million, not to mention Glassford Hill. It's $2.3 million next year for Glassford Hill. If we get state funding, it'd only be $500,000, but that's still $500,000. There isn't money to do everything. I'll jump to the end. There isn't money to do everything. So you guys are going to have to make some decisions this year. The city hall improvements, new city hall is kind of like buying a boat. There's always money you can throw into that hole in the water.
Hopefully nobody's watching this,
Yeah.
in addition to nobody being here.
We're going to be real today because we need to be real as we look at these challenges. And I also wanted to cover our new budget approach. We talked about that with the procurement code. We have an authorized expenditure list you were going to put together as part of this. We're going to have different presentation by the departments as they come to the city so you can hear directly from them about their departments and the big expenditures and hopefully approve those so we don't have to deal with them when we're dealing with other significant issues. So I wanted to talk a bit about that as well. Okay, legislative attacks. I've put a few of them up here and what it would mean to our general fund. Another change we're going to make this year in the budget process, we've always done operating revenues and non-operating revenues. And I can resend the slides, Councilman, if you'd like the slides. I'll email them to everybody after this. So this year, the legislature had some great ideas. Let's get rid of food tax. Works for them. They don't tax food, only cities do, so it didn't cost them anything. Residential rental, again, it's dead right now, but nothing's dead until the session is over. Corporate income tax, TPT, on hygiene and diapers, that's the governor's package there. And then they had another great idea, which is the vehicle license tax the city gets, which we currently have in the general fund and is used to provide public safety, like police and other things that are needed with vehicles on the road. They wanted to restrict that to only be used for streets. So on this schedule, I put the estimated economic revenue impact of each of these things and what percentage that is of one of the new terms we're going to use today, and also as we get into the budget process. Operating revenues are one thing, but recurring operating revenues, which is where you can build operations, which is where you can pay for salaries and all that. There are operating revenues that are not recurring. An example would be sales tax on construction. You only build a house once. You can't build a police salary around one-time sales tax revenues. We also had a large tick up in intergovernmental revenues this year, the result of some timing related to the COVID pandemic and the 2020 tax reporting. Again, you can't build salaries into that because it's not there next year. You'd have to get rid of the positions. So anyway, we're going to talk about recurring revenues a lot as we go. So if all these things had passed, it would have meant 22% of the things we pay for with our operating revenues would have had to go away. So we can keep an eye on that.
Mayor Pro Tem, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Mayor. Mark?
Yes,
if
sir.
I could ask you a question regarding this. I reached out to one of our esteemed state legislators, and they suggested to me that a lot of the shortfall in some of these bills regarding the food exemption and residential exemption, that those would be made up with Wayfair money. And I'm just curious if you could opine on that a little bit.
We can definitely talk about that. That is a common thought of the legislature. It's not accurate, as in the volume from the Wayfair decision or whether that is legitimately new money. And we have some slides later on where we can look at that.
Excellent.
So,
Thank you.
Sure. So remember that 22% as we go forward here. Another big thing this year, which I wanted to touch on because it was part of the city's long-range plan, when we took Prop 401 to the voters, or you guys took Prop 401 to the voters and got them to agree to do it, elimination of the unfunded PSPRS liability. 443. 443? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yes, you're right.
Thank
The
you,
numbers
Councilman
just,
Shishka.
yeah, the numbers all run together after 443, 441 was a different one. 443, $78 million down. We've pulled it down as of June 30 of 2022. We have paid in addition to there it is, 443, the 443 dedicated tax, $66 million to that date. We also paid $11 million of our fund balance in the general fund that council committed to the voters to do, as well as the proceeds from the sale of Station 70 and the sale of the hot shot buggies, as well as the contribution we were able to get from the state for the hot shots. Since June or since July, we've received through December 7.5 million more in the dedicated sales tax, which will help get that down to the designated level, as well as we have 3 more million remaining to get from the state each year over the next 3 years. So what did that do? Well, it did what was presented to council it would do. Here is your rate. They ran up to almost 100%, and now they ran down. And that capacity from that reduced contribution rate, annual required contribution rate, the intent was that would then be available to help cover the increased public safety needs of the community without having to do another tax. So, at the top end, it was about 6.4 million more out of the general fund. As we're finishing it, we're still at about 2 million a year, so that's 4.4 million that was available more in 2023 than there was at the high end of it. Again, that'll continue to kind of even out as we get down, but the big money is there. We went from the 100% almost to 25% in fire and 15 in PD. The normal cost is around 12 or 14, so that's where they will end up. So what was that going to be used for in the grand scheme when 443 was taken to the public? Chief Dura was kind enough to provide me some early preliminary updated capital numbers related to the general plan that he just put in place. As you can see, there is significant capital needs identified in the fire department's general plan for the next 6 years that are presented here. That's almost $32 million in additional capital needs with new stations. So that's one number. And again, that's a lot of money. 31, we're going to have to do a debt issue to build some of these things, if not all of these things, and we'll have to figure that out as we go. And of course, with debt issues, unlike the federal government, when we issue debt, there's an operating expense to it. We have to pay that debt back. So that reduces available money for salaries. Additional numbers from Chief Dura. We have operating budget of the fire department projected out for the next 6 years as the top line there. The remainder of that is additional operating needed to fund these stations. So that's an additional over this 6-year period, that's a 78% increase in their operating budget, almost $8.4 million. You can't fund those with debt. Those are recurring, they keep going on, they go on, and they go on, and they go on. Those have to be recurring revenues. So again, that was kind of part of getting the PSPRS paid down, so there was oxygen, if you will, in that fund to be able to take care of these things. So obviously we haven't moved towards any of that in 2023. So what did we spend our recurring revenues on in 2023? So here's the pie chart, and this is a pie chart similar to ones you've seen before, but this is actually the uses of those recurring operating revenues. Where do those monies go? Obviously, fire and police, 67.5%. We had a huge contingency for possible $30 million issue out at the airport, and there would have been debt service on that. If that's there, that kind of used up all that oxygen. And for 10, 20 years, that's not going to be available, whatever the debt service length is on that. We have the general fund. Again, these funds, you see community development of 0.9. These expenditures are net of their direct revenues. So community development has building inspections, impacts, permits and those type of things, as well as police have fines and forfeitures. Fire has other fees that they charge. These are net of those. What do they need of that recurring tax base that the legislature constantly likes to attack? So library at 5%, rec service 7.6, and then there was 1.2 of that recurring revenue base available for capital. That doesn't go very far. Every year, just in the general fund for vehicle replacements and stuff, this year we had 3.3 million in capital for the general fund, not to mention the airport, which needed 2.6 million from the general fund, and the golf that needed 1.7. Now those revenues above this 1.2 come from the non-recurring operating revenues, like the sales tax on construction activity or the one-time bump up in state shared revenues. Those help us make up those capital needs, because those should be one-time expenditures, not ongoing, although every year there is capital needs that need to be met.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Mayor, could I ask a question? What is our current increase in sales tax revenues?
It's in the next couple of slides.
Okay.
If you can wait.
I can wait that long.
He is ready for any question. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This is fantastic.
And you've only seen half the slides. I got other slides, so if you have a question, please bring it up. We
But
can
just,
hopefully
just to
cover it.
reiterate, sales tax is really what pays for this stuff.
Sales tax is definitely what pays for this stuff. Well, I have a slide that I wasn't going to use, but since you bring it up, our recurring revenue.
Am I your straight guy?
You're my straight guy. Our recurring revenues that we're talking about here, what you use to pay for all these things, sales tax is 50% of it there. Intergovernmental, that's state shared income tax, state shared sales tax, VLT, again, which they wanted to take, are 40%. Franchise taxes and property taxes make up, 10%. 9%, and then the other is like rents on cell towers and other things located on city properties. So that gives you an idea of what that's made up of. It is primarily sales tax. Let me get back to this one. So just looking at this graph, which is the use of those revenues, if the state decided that they were going to take 22% of these recurring revenues, what do you guys want to cut? When they were just talking about food tax, I said, that's great. I only have to cut 2 libraries, but I only got 1 library, so I'm not sure how I cut 2. I don't know where you get it. I mean, it would be a devastation to our ability to provide services. And that's before we get public safety to the point that public safety feels they need to be.
It just comes from the Magic Wayfair Ferry.
Yeah. So with that, any questions more there? I mean, you got market compensation, which of course is going up significantly because it has a cost of living level type increase in it. We also had some bad news from the SAFER grant, where we were hoping to get 8 firefighters needed for operations, and they did not materialize. That's something we can talk about as we go through that, but so those aren't being filled. So that's impacting the fire department's ability to let their employees use their vacation time. It's impacting their overtime. If council decides that they want a portion of those 8 to be funded from the general fund, council can direct that, and I will bring it back next meeting, and then fire can start filling some of those. Fire likes firefighters in multiples of 3. No, it's because they have 3 shifts, so they need them in multiples of 3. We've had 8 that we were going to get from SAFER, and we also funded 1 out of the general fund to get the 9. I'm not proposing that council say go ahead with 8, but if they wanted to say go ahead with 2 or 5 or something, well, we already have 1, so we're trying to get to a multiple of 6 or 3. So 3, 6, 9. But so something to think about when we start talking about revenues. If we were to do that for the remainder of this year, it would have a nominal impact because, of course, there's a recruitment and there's a filling and all that, but fire could get started getting these guys on board so that they could help with the severe short staffing that they have. So this is a slide that you had in the budget workshop that we did back last May, just one with the addition of where we are at the end of December. As you can see, general operations are at 45%, with 50% of the year gone. That's great. PSPRS, we've only distributed 2.5. We were kind of waiting for that report, which we got in December. So we will be distributing the rest of that in the second half of the year. The money is there. We were just waiting to know which trust we needed to put it in to bring those down. The contingent debt service, of course, has not been spent because we have not issued the contingent debt, which was $30 million, the next line. We had grant contingencies, which we haven't had to use yet. And then we have capital, and we're about 24% of the capital has been expended, which is honestly actually pretty good. Sometimes we have a hard time getting capital projects done, but we are moving along with those capital projects this year. This is another schedule similar to what you see in the old style of the council budget workshop, with the separation between operating and non-operating. It is not a separation between recurring and non-recurring operating expenditures. But with that said, I've also added a little column in the middle for what percentage that is of our overall budget, just to give you a feel for the size of that particular operation, and then also where they are to date. So like general government is almost 4% of our overall operation. They're slightly over 50% because of timing of some of the memberships and the other things that are paid out of there. Airport is about 2% of our operations, not 2% of our discussions, but 2% of our operating budget. They're at 55%, which is over the 50, but that's related to additional DIBEL expenditures related to land acquisition, as well as legal expenditures that were not budgeted. The remainder of the departments there, you can see them. Community development at 1.7 is within the range because of reduced activity there. They're not spending up to where they projected because buildings slowed down a little bit. And then again, we got the rest of them as well. And some of these have maintenance contracts are in the second half of the year, so they're all good. The non-departmental is the only one that's significantly low, and that has to do with the delay on the distribution of the monies to PSPRS until we got that report. In capital area, airport capital is only 3.5. For various reasons. Obviously, grant projects take a lot to get going. Public Works capital is at 22.2, and other capitals at 39. And the other capital are things like the Granite Creek corridor, the new city hall, some fire vehicles and fire stations, parking garage stairways and councils and dispatch and open space, which is a big part of what's been spent in relation to the open space we purchased. And then, of course, the contingency of $30 million, which has not been spent. And again, until council decides if we can afford to spend that, if we can afford the debt service on it, and what that actual number needs to be, is a discussion to keep in mind that there are all these other public safety needs out there. And it's not that one is better than another, it's just you cannot do everything. You are going to need to make a decision as we get into in this next year. I threw this slide in here because it always comes up. The top part of the slide is the actual cost of the new city hall as we sit here today. I have unfortunately no doubt that the 4.1 million, 4.2 that is in FY23 will go up as we move into FY24. So I'm afraid that 12.5 is not the top yet. We won't know until we're totally done. The internal loan, again, was 7.5 million, as you can see on the bottom, and we've put various payments that we've received over time against it, and so now at 3.7. The remainder of the 12 million is being paid out of the budgets, the one-time type revenues as we go through time, as well as fund balance. Wayfarer. Here's our taxable activity for the first 6 months of the year. You can see, 3.6, and I'm not complaining. 3.6 is great, and I'm so glad it's positive.
Yeah, but what is inflation?
Exactly. You get into inflation and the fact that the compensation plan is going to have to go up by a bigger number than 3.6. It would be nice if it was stronger, but it's not surprised it's where it's at, because this is what the Federal Reserve is trying to do, is to slow down consumption. So it's working for them. You can see our various levels there. If you look, I probably have a pointer here. This is online sales. Is $47 million. Again, that is not all new sales. Obviously, as it started coming in, it was a movement from the retail section down to here, because several large online sellers already paid sales tax in Arizona. You might have heard of some of these. Amazon, a few of those others were already paying tax because they have facilities in the state. Wayfair was actually the only large of the large 8, was the only one that wasn't. And then we have gotten thousands of little retailers that sell on the internet that are paying now. So we have a large volume, and the dollars have gone up. But either way, if you assume that this was all new, and again, I think that's a poor assumption. I think maybe 30% of it might be new. You double that, make it 50 and double it, that's 100. So that would be 1 million new if it was new. But I think it's maybe 30 new. So that's maybe 300,000 a year to the general fund, which is, not going to make up 3 million for food and 1 million for that and this. And that's something to keep in mind. And again, food tax is huge for the city of Prescott. It was a huge part of our economic attraction activities through the 90s. We worked hard to get 2 Walmarts, and we worked hard to get a Costco, and we worked hard to get 2 Fry's, and we worked hard to keep our 2 Safeways. Because it's food and everybody has to buy food, and sales tax is not a stable revenue. The only part of it that is stable is food. So it's one of the components that actually gives our sales tax base some stability, because you always have to buy food. And again, it's important, and I get it. It's regressive by definition, but we still got to pay for police and fire somehow. Any more questions on the sales tax? Did that answer your question, Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I guess so even if we were to assume your numbers, what I heard you say was even if we were to assume that all that online sales retail was new, that wouldn't make up the shortfall that the legislature is trying to carve out of us.
If it was all new, it would make up the short-term or the residential rental component.
But not the residential and the food tax.
No, it wouldn't make up anything.
I just appreciate that, and I'd love you.
If it was all new.
Yeah, if it was all new, and I agree, your assessment's probably accurate that there's no way it could all be new. I just would ask kindly that you take your roadshow to the state legislature and educate some folks down there.
Great.
Member Rusing?
Thank you. I have one question. I'd like to go back to the internal loan. How much money can we loan ourselves internally?
It depends what else it's needed for. So what we do on an internal loan is we look at balances and funds that are not needed immediately. And again, when council did that, it was like, we want to pay this off quick. We want it to be like less than 10 years. So we were able to use some of the various longer term funds to pay that back. There is not an unlimited number. Pretty much that was pushing it. The only reason it worked is because we were committed to getting it repaid quickly. As you can see, in 2021, we took out the loan and we repaid, almost, almost 2.5 million of it.
Okay, so it's good to know the parameters.
Yeah, it's and again, I send out an investment report every 6 months to you guys, so you see where our investments, where our cash is kept, and we do have money that isn't needed for a year or two, and so, but we need to, we need to make sure it's earning interest, and of course we did.
Okay.
Mayor?
Yeah, Councilman Shishka?
I guess what I was trying to get at by pointing out what we're looking at from the standpoint of increase in sales tax revenue and inflation was that if Russell's in the pews, let's say, what means the most is if sales tax revenues are up 3%, 3.6%, and inflation's 7%, then we're actually in the negative by about 3.5%.
Correct. And well said, Councilman. I have another hidden slide for you. Here is the actual inflation numbers that we will be using in the budget. 11.5, we do calendar year. We use the city of Phoenix as the closest area comparable to our economy because, of course, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does not survey small communities. They only do big ones. And this is what we've used for the merit system. As you know, we did 2, we did 5. This year it's 11.5 just for that. We gave 5% already, so that leaves another 6.5 to consider as we put together the budget on pay changes. So yeah, right there, 11.5 minus 4. Yeah, you're still short, and that's only 50% of those recurring revenues. So, any other questions on sales tax? Don't mean to get you all depressed. Here we are with the bed tax. This is another sheet that we do often. These is not taxable activity like the one before it. This is actual sales tax collected, and we've talked about this, if you'll recall, last year and the year before, that the run-up that we were seeing from $1 million essentially up to 1.64, which was last year, was a temporary phenomenon related to availability and desire for people to travel, cash in the system from government rebates that people have gotten, various other things that were getting people to travel and enjoy, and that we would see it normalize as we move forward. And we're seeing it normalize this year. As you can see, numbers are still great. I say that to say, don't worry about these negatives. Not unexpected at all by your finance staff anyway. I'm actually surprised it's not more negative yet. We have had an increase of our inventory. Nightly room rates are still exceedingly high in the city, which drive this up as well. So it's still holding up pretty good. I expect this to be back down to a 1.2, 1.3 on more of an average term as we move into the future in the next 5 years. I think you'll see it turn there unless we have a significant increase in rooms, maybe this property, maybe not, or maybe other downtown properties that we've heard about. All right, flip. All right. Revenues. We talked about revenues. This is the same presentation that we used during the workshop, only with the half year shown. This does not break them out between recurring and non-recurring. This is just all operating revenues, so please keep that in mind. In the new workshop, they will be broken out because we need to start thinking about what is recurring as we start trying to build the public safety response that this council has talked about, that our citizens seem to want. We need to keep that in mind and preserve that recurring revenue, because that's, you know, firemen are great. You know, some of my favorite people are firemen. But they like to get paid every year, not just once. So revenues are great. Again, revenue projections are always seem to be low because when I have to project revenues, I have to project the next 6 months of where we're going to end up, and then the next 12 months. So I'm always projecting 18 months out. So I always keep it relatively conservative. So we are over the 50% at 53, which is not a lot over, but it's over. That's great. The PSPRS tax is much higher than that, of course, because we only projected half a year. So why isn't it 100% mark? There's a question. It's not 100% because we haven't received the amount from December yet. That will come in January, and then piddle in through February and March. So I believe it will be at the 8.3 or a little higher than that, actually, by the time it gets here. Bed tax is doing great. Again, we project down where we think the average is going to be as opposed to where these spikes are, so it is above average right now. Property tax is just a timing issue. We get what we assess there. Of course, part of it's paid in November and part of it's paid in May. Some people pay it all once, so it's not exactly 50%. Franchise taxes are about right on. as well as intergovernmental revenues. And again, that's not great budgeting. That's the fact that we know exactly what we're going to get in state shared income tax because that was collected 2 years ago. So the revenues are looking good. License and permits are down because the building permits are, again, building is slowing down. Governmental services are down because of plan checks, slowing down. Fines and forfeitures are down, which is a constant theme that we've seen over the years. They're looking for more diversion approaches and less just assessing fees against people that, like all of us, have trouble paying fees. Utility services is pretty much right on. It's a little low, and that's only because we have a rate increase scheduled in water that happened in January, so the second half of the year will be higher. Solid waste is doing well, and that again has to do with volumes at the transfer station as well. Airport services is right on with their revenues, and golf is a little low. It's a little low because we have some level of contingency in that in case revenues come in, we need the budget appropriation to be able to spend them. So we always throw a $300,000 addition over what is being projected by Indigo Golf. Sorry, I keep calling it Billy Casper, but it's Indigo now. But so they're not anything to worry about there. The internal service funds is right on track, and the other is general things and relatively small. So nothing to worry about. Grants are a spend before you get grants, so they are kind of related to the expenditures we looked at earlier. Debt proceeds that you see at that line are from the WIFA loans and wastewater and water, and they come in, again, they're also like the grants. We spend it, we get reimbursement from WIFA, so they come in as they go. I signed a $3.5 million reimbursement before I came to this meeting today. So again, they come in throughout the year. And again, the potential debt issue that we just threw in there, depending on how the year went and what council decided to do, has not been spent, so it's at zero. We've gotten questions from the public, from council, everybody about fund balance. So this is a slide that we used during the budget workshop, but granted it was probably 30 slides in and everybody's usually sleepy by then. So I wanted to go over it a little bit in more detail. We had our beginning balance, and again, this is broken out between fund types and then some grouping of fund types. I'm going to focus mainly on the general fund. Net operations, operating revenues, recurring and one-time, as well as operating expenses, recurring and one-time net, had a positive 10.5 million. A lot of that was because of those one-time revenues. The capital and transfers have to do with the transfers to the airport, to the golf course for capital and operating needs, as well as other grant transfers, and then all the capital. There was a command center for the police department and fire department that is in there. There were the fire truck, half a fire truck, a lot of police cruisers, and those type of things. Then we had our contingent debt issue, and then the spending of that which nets to zero there, 30 and 30. But then there's the $4 million projected debt service on that, which of course comes off of that. That gives us a balance in fund balance of 14 million essentially. Well, we have a reserve policy that requires a percentage of operating revenues be kept in reserve for timing issues throughout the year, for failures of the tax base. As you may recall, maybe not, in 2021, once the towers were, the 9/11 incident, retail stopped. People were stuck at home. It's just stuck at home in front of their TV. We continued to have food sales, but nobody was buying cars. Nobody was buying TVs. Nobody was doing anything, and we saw a huge dip in our sales tax. That's what those reserves are for. No matter what happens, again, as great as police and fire are, they still want to be paid so they can feed their kids or wives or whatever, or husbands. And then we have some liabilities in general fund, which we need to keep that reserve. So in 2023, the general fund council and staff proposed spending all but $95,000 of the unassigned revenues. And again, those were allocated, they haven't been spent. There's still the $4 million of the debt service and that for a bond issue that may not happen. And of course, there's some timing issues on motor vehicles because good luck trying to find motor vehicles in this economy. And with that, we can look at the others. All those are reserved, so there's like no unassigned balances there because all the streets has to be used for streets. So it's a specific program. It's not up to council discretion to spend it on something else. Any questions on fund balance? A lot of fun. Only 20 more slides as we go through this. No. This is the last slide unless you have questions. Again, I have other slides that we can talk about other issues if you want. The budget process for 2024. And again, I encourage the public out there watching and
Lois is here.
and yeah, and the one here in Chambers to be part of this process. This process with, as Councilman Shiska pointed out, with the lower growth in revenue and the increasing need because of inflation and fuel prices and other things, you can't do everything. If you want to do a Gateway Park, we can't do a fire station. Or I'm not pitting anything against anything, but if you need to spend $30 million around the airport, you aren't going to be able to put in fire stations. You can't do it all because there's not going to be money to put people in that fire station. Yeah, we may be able to spend the money to build it, but there won't be the operating flow of those recurring operating revenues to put people in it. So something that we need to consider as we move forward. So please be involved in the 2024 budget process. Mid-year budget report, all the things in red are public. Right now, departmental missions are passed, they're in. Operating budgets and new personnel requests were put in on Friday, and there are a lot of needs being brought forward by your department heads. I've been reviewing those all morning and yesterday. There are a lot of needs we're going to have to figure out as we go through this, and you're going to decide what's important.
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Sure, Councilwoman can tell me.
Yeah, Mark, this is all really interesting, but let me ask you again, a kind of a question on how it works with the city. So do you go at some point during the year, either before or after the budget, and ask the department heads to do, an inside audit of what they have, of things that may not be valid anymore? Can we cut anything out of them? Do they ever give money back? I mean, certainly things wear out. They're not on the books anymore. Have they been sold? I mean, just kind of a departmental audit.
You're talking about fixed assets?
Yeah, or even maybe positions, because I looked at your pie chart, and I was looking at some of the money that went to rec and some of the money that went to, public works, and those are also very large amounts of money that go in there. But are the department heads at any point during the year asked to do an audit of their requests to see if there is anything that?
Well, there's no formal request for an audit, but I can assure you that all department heads keep track of their positions and make sure they're still in what they are expected to provide. They're being used. There are not, people sitting around wondering what to do. Department heads keep their employees focused on the mission. As far as fixed assets go, we are in the process of updating a fixed asset inventory across the city. But again, you don't get a lot of money because the city of Prescott tends to keep fixed assets until they're of little value to anybody. And again, there's constant, and I think Gwen and Ralph are here, and they can speak to it as well, but there is always constant movement by departments, like Public Works, big department. They're constantly moving people into various areas to meet the needs. So there's not anything that could be given back, unless I'm wrong. And okay. So it is a thing that we rely on the department heads to manage their departments. I know that might sound weird, but it shouldn't.
Thank you.
And you've seen it with the fire department's efforts on a strategic plan to manage their people, but also to plan for the future. And that's an exercise we encourage all of our departments to do. it's beyond the council strategic plan because it's kind of department specific. And we'll look to Ralph, but there was 1 or 2 hours to put that together. You know, it was hundreds of hours by a lot of people to put that strategic plan together. They're not easy, but they're important so that we can plan for the future.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. No, what I think probably what I was asking, has there ever in the history of the city of Prescott been a time where some of the departments have been asked to make cuts? And if they did, how did they do it?
Yes.
Okay.
There have been numerous times through the PSPRS thing, we were browning out fire stations because we couldn't fill positions. So, you know, we went to a same-day response model in fire, I think. No, it was not that bad. It was, but it did affect response times because we had to brown out fire stations. We laid off police officers. We have laid people off because of budgetary shortfalls.
Councilman Tenney.
Thank you. So just to follow up on that kind of great question, what I'm hearing is when we've asked departments to make cutbacks in the past, it's not that, you know, they buy less coffee for their staff. It's services to our citizens that are scaled back as a result of that, yes?
Yes. It has to be the PSPRS crisis made the city focus its spending and its service level. Does that mean your finance director thinks that we're doing all of our services to the level they should be, either too high or too low? Of course not. We all have our opinions, but you set those levels, you know, not me. Yeah, and they have been, and now the PSPRS is done. We need to decide what is important to this council, and it's not we want to do everything or we want to do everything a little bit. There's going to have to be some decisions because we cannot do everything that is being demanded with the money we have.
We're going to have to do some ors instead of ands at some point. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, thank you.
Councilman Shishka.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark, give me a ballpark. At our peak, how many employees did the city have?
578.
And what do we have right now?
All right, 40-something.
I have that in one of my notes on my slides, if you give me just a second.
I'll be your straight guy again here.
We have 548 full-time and 50 full-time equivalent temps. So 598, but the 578 was full-time. So we're about 30 employees less than we were at our peak still.
Okay, thank you.
We don't have fewer folks in town.
Yeah.
So
Can I just clarify one thing? Just for the record, I'm not suggesting we cut Public Works in any way, shape, or form. Just for the record.
and again, I was just using them because they are a large department.
I don't mean Public Works, I meant fire and police.
Okay.
Public safety.
Again, we've been looking through since we got them. Actually, they came in yesterday at noon because we left the timeline open because of the snow last week. We have capital being submitted on the 10th. We roll all that together and start meeting with city manager and start disappointing departments in April about what can and cannot move forward to council. The council workshops, as we talked about at the procurement workshop that we did, are going to be different this year. There is going to be a handout. We are going to endeavor to keep it to a length that you guys will not balk at when you see like the ones in the past. We are going to endeavor to keep it shorter. And that's our commitment, and your return commitment is you're going to read it before we walk into our workshops so that we can have an active participation and discussion about the budget for the year. It's going to be great. You're going to love to read it. It's going to be a beautiful document. I'm excited. So that'll be, we're hopefully in 2 days, the 11th and the 18th of May. Possibly we may fall to the 25th. We're a little uncertain because we haven't had the department heads present their whole area for a while. Then adoption comes in June with tentative and publishing and final, and then setting the property taxes usually in July. So with that, that is the end of kind of where I wanted to go, but like I say, I have lots of slides if you guys have other questions.
Well, I will make a couple of comments. Clearly, we are so overly dependent on sales tax as a revenue source for funding virtually all of our operations. And when you look at property tax revenues, it's still less than 2% of the entire budget. However, with expanded growth and development, we are seeing a dramatic increase in the value of property within the city. But property tax doesn't pay for the expected public safety that those new residents rightly can expect. And that's where I think we have a disconnect between sales tax dependency and property tax generation for city services. You mentioned what was the maximum rate that we could increase property taxes a year?
Sure.
280,000, something like that?
Pick the one slide I didn't put in this. I'm sorry, I don't have that. Do you have, I know we put that worksheet together if you have
I
it.
think it was like 287,000 would be the maximum that we would be allowed to increase property taxes on an annual basis. So when we have a budget of 1.9 million in property taxes, increasing the maximum allowed under state budgetary restrictions would only increase it a couple $100,000. But clearly, when you look at public safety requirements, and for us to be able to continue to provide those services and response times to new residents, we've got a clear disconnect there. When we are dependent on sales tax, you know, we have pretty expected revenue and economic cycles. And I think right now the majority of most of the economists in the country are projecting a recession to be occurring here in the relatively next couple of quarters. And that's bound to impact our sales tax collection. So here we are with more demands for services and less revenue to provide them. So I think property tax increases have always been kind of off the table because they were so minimal. But if we had taken those couple $100,000 a year over the last 10 or 12 years, we probably would have at least some additional revenue to be able to provide those services. And it just gripes me that who benefits from the increasing value of development in the city? It's the county. The county gets those substantial property tax increases, but we have to provide the services. So that's where the real disconnect is. Even though I'm one of the last people to propose more taxes, I think by taking those small incremental steps in property taxes at least add some small steps to fill in the gap between sales tax and property tax. And we have to keep in mind, Mark, what was the actual rate of return for PSPRS statewide?
For 22, I believe it was -1 or.
I think it was like -4
Okay.
relative to the expected rate of return, which was 7.3.
Correct.
So they missed their number by 11%. And if we're going into a recessionary cycle here, I don't think we can expect them to make up for that negative result and be able to hit their numbers for next year. So I think we have to almost build in an additional expectation of payment to be able to keep PSPRS whole now that the 443 tax is expired.
And that is going to be part of the policy that we bring you during the budget process this year. We will be looking at what that policy should look like.
So I think those are two areas that we have to really be diligent about trying to understand how sales tax is our primary generating revenue source and being able to try to find some way to reduce our extreme dependency on that. So that's something that we can talk more about during the actual budget workshops. And fortunately, because of 443 and I think we picked a good time to institute that. We also did a remarkably accurate prediction of when we put this massive amount of money from our contingencies all at once. Even though I was suggesting that we dollar cost average those in there, we dumped it in at a really good time. So that really helped our funding mechanism as well. But, you know, we have to take a little longer term view on how best to manage those funds going forward. I mean, Tier 3 clearly is self-sustaining almost ever since it was created. But 1 and 2 still have a significant impact on our pension funding.
Yeah, definitely. And again, they will, especially as we get further down time, because eventually there will be nobody still working in Tier 1 and Tier 2, just drawing on it. And again, Tier 3, yeah, because those people are years from retirement, so it's definitely positive right now.
Away. Councilman Tenney.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned a couple of things I wanted to piggyback off of. One was that you're probably the last person to talk about raising sales taxes. I'll probably be the second to last person to talk about that, but it's worth noting that even before we phased out the 0.75% sales tax for PSPRS, we were the lowest of the 3 municipalities in the area, and now we're even lower than that. So it's not like we could make a strong argument that we're overtaxed in comparison to our neighbors based on the services that we provide. You mentioned property taxes as well. The amount that we get from property taxes is relatively low, but it might be time to do some consideration of that as well, given that our property taxes in Prescott also tend to be lower than our neighbors based on the fact that our fire department funding is already built into our system. We don't pay additional tax for that as our neighbors do, and our school district taxes at a lower rate here than is taxed at either Chino Valley or Prescott Valley. So we're really well off in terms of very low taxes here, and it may be time to consider how we balance that with the services that people demand of us. Nobody ever calls up and says, I'm okay with the potholes in my street, just hold off a little bit.
No, I haven't heard that either yet.
Yeah.
Mayor, could I ask a question?
If I could just address your point, the great points, and I agree with all of them, with the fact that the legislature has decided that you don't have the ability to change your property tax, except within a very narrow scope. But
Councilman Shishka.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that.
And then Rusing, you drop
Mark,
out.
you've been around, I hate to say it, for a while, but wasn't it in the early 2000s that we kind of got stuck between a rock and a hard place with property tax?
yes, there was a proposition, boy, I wish I'd brought that sheet I put together on property taxes for dates. There was a proposition, the legislature put forward a proposition to the voters to freeze property taxes at current levels.
And that was in the early 2000s
Yes,
levels.
I believe 2006, I believe, don't hold me to that. But the issue was the city of Prescott at the time, the council at the time, felt sales tax was a better source for providing services because it allowed the people who were coming here to work and who were coming here to shop and were on our roads to pay their fair share of the public safety costs. So they intentionally kept our property tax down with the intent that if we ever needed that property tax for something like stormwater control or other things that were being talked about at the time, we would be able to use that capacity to fund those additional needs, whether it was, again, more police or fire or stormwater. So at that time, we were not assessing our maximum levy. So that was frozen with that proposition, which surprisingly passed. Hey, reduce taxes. That's the easiest campaign to get across the finish line for sure. We lost half of our levy. So instead, and these are rough numbers again, I apologize for not having them, but instead of 1.9, we would have been closer to 4 million a year in property tax capacity. We could have done that. So again, that was really bad for the city of Prescott. And for several years after that, the council was very much in favor of assessing the maximum each time in case the legislature decided to do that again. Right now, we haven't done it for a couple of years, so we have almost 280,000 of capacity available, which isn't a lot in dollars, and it's very little in the actual levy on the individual people. But the way the truth in taxation notice reads, it will be a 18% in property tax when we post it in the paper, which gets a lot of people interested, even though it's a very small dollar amount. And again, if council is interested in starting to use up that capacity, that would be good for your staff to know, because the truth in taxation steps have a lot of steps to them. So if council wants to consider raising that, that would be good for me to know sooner than later.
Let's string us up on the courthouse plaza.
All right, any other questions or concerns? I'm certainly looking forward to these workshops.
Oh, me too.
But like Councilwoman Cantelme was mentioning, in my professional experience working with zero-based budgeting, sometimes was able to clarify some areas that could be done more efficiently departmental-wise, rather than just take whatever you were allowed last year and then say, well, we need this more on top of it, instead of really looking at where start with zero and then work forward, justifying each need departmental-wise.
And again, that, just to clarify how we do prepare the budget here, we don't do a zero-based budgeting, which would be for each department to reestablish the need for fire service every year. But we do require, if there's any increase over last year's budget, operating budget, if they want any more, they have to do a separate, what we call budget scenario, and explain why they want that additional money. And then that is reviewed by budget staff in the city manager's office, and those determinations are made. Again, not true base budget. Just to further your point, Mayor, I threw up the slide from a workshop a few weeks ago, and you're right, it was almost 5% negative this year. And I also have the 7-year average up there for the PSPRS investment earnings. And they're actually, if you look at 7 years past, they're right at 7.3. But again, as you pointed out, they're not going to be at 7.3 this year, so they're going to start dropping below that level. But you can see the history. It's all over the board.
Council Member Rusing.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment in general to remind the public, who are our taxpayers, that all the revenue that we collect is applied for the public health, safety, and welfare of the community. So it is money well spent.
Very good. I think that, do we have any public comment?
Mayor.
Well, thank you, Director Woodfill. We appreciate your enthusiasm, and obviously you continue to be very excited about having these numbers presented to us.
Oh, I'm always very excited. Thank you, sir.
All right, this study session is adjourned.